Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time I wrapped up the Siege of Petersburg, with over 30 episodes going into the series. Now I start the much shorter Appomattox Campaign, picking up where I left off as the siege ends and the withdrawal from Petersburg and Richmond begins. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. On the night of April 2nd and into the early morning of April 3rd, 1865, Richmond burned as Robert E. Lee began moving the Army of Northern Virginia out of the siege lines of Petersburg and Richmond and to the west, hopefully making it to Amelia Courthouse, and then push south to join Joseph E. Johnston's Army of Tennessee in North Carolina. Fitzhugh Lee's cavalry and Richard Anderson's small corps were already on the south side of the Appomattox River. Those in Petersburg would cross to the north side of the Appomattox River, but to get to Amelia Courthouse, Lee knew they would need to recross it further west. Richard Ewell's Richmond defense troops crossed the James River and would head west along the Richmond and Danville Railroad. Before the Army moved out, Confederate President Jefferson Davis and his cabinet left from that same railroad line station in Richmond, destined for Danville, Virginia. At a little after 3 a.m. on April 3rd, troops from the 9th Corps and some from the 6th Corps made it into Petersburg, with troops from the 25th Corps proceeding into Richmond. Both cities surrendered to nearby Union commanders. Confederate forces set fire to warehouses before leaving both cities, and the fires began to spread in Richmond. Godfrey Watzel, the Union commander occupying Richmond, dispatched troops to put out the fires. Richmond residents broke into stores during the chaos of the evacuation and turned the once Confederate capital into a chaotic scene of mob rule. Watzel helped put an end to the destruction. It was after 8 a.m. that morning when Army of the Potomac commander George Meade found General-in-Chief Ulysses S. Grant at Thomas Wallace's house in Petersburg on Market Street. They discussed the next steps in the pursuit of Lee. They agreed that Lee would retreat along the Richmond and Danville Railroad, and to chase him would only result in him getting away. They needed to cut Lee off from the south. With that strategy in mind, Meade left to go make arrangements. Another person found Grant at the Wallace house that morning. It was President Abraham Lincoln. He was thrilled with Grant's progress and sat down to join him in discussion. Lincoln said, "Do you know, General, I had a sort of sneaking idea all along that you intended to do something like this. But I thought some time ago that you would so maneuver as to have Sherman come up and be near enough to cooperate with you." Grant replied, "Yes, I thought at the time that Sherman's army might advance far enough to be in supporting distance of the Eastern armies when the spring campaign against Lee opened. But I had a feeling that it would be better to let Lee's old antagonist give his army the final blow and finish the job. If the Western troops were even to put in an appearance against Lee's army, it might give some of our politicians a chance to stir up sectional feeling in claiming everything for the troops from their own section of the country. The Western armies have been successful in their campaigns, and it is due to the Eastern armies to let them vanquish their old enemy single-handedly." Lincoln traveled to Richmond, walking along its streets, and even went into the mansion of Jefferson Davis, the White House of the Confederacy, where the lanky executive sat in the reception chair of the reception room of the house. The home soon became the headquarters of Godfrey Watzel. Soon Grant set off to join his armies in the push westward to cut Lee off. Lee took a respite at Clover Hill, the home of James H. Cox, where he found out that Bevel's Bridge across the Appomattox River was unusable. This forced Longstreet and John B. Gordon's corps to move north to Good's Bridge, while Ewell's troops crossed further upstream. Along with Longstreet's own troops, he also commanded A.P. Hill's troops following that general's death the day before. To the south, Richard Anderson's corps and Fitzhugh Lee's cavalry battled with Philip Sheridan's cavalry south of the Appomattox River. After fighting with George Armstrong Custer's Union cavalry, Anderson and the cavalry pressed on toward Amelia Courthouse. By the evening of April 3rd, most of Lee's army was on the south or west bank of the Appomattox River, but the Union were marching just as hard to catch up to them. The 5th Corps under Charles Griffin, the 2nd Corps under Andrew Humphreys, and the 6th Corps under Horatio Wright were right behind Sheridan. Edward Ord's Army of the James, consisting of the 24th Corps, moved south of the others, with the 9th Corps of the Army of the Potomac behind the 24th Corps. At dawn on April 4th, most of the Army of Northern Virginia assembled at Amelia Courthouse. Going to the train station, the rebels opened up the train cars hoping to find food, but only found ammunition. 350,000 rations were supposed to be waiting on them at that station, but in the series of telegrams sent during April 2nd, a mix-up occurred, and ordnance came instead of food. Lee issued a proclamation to the people of the surrounding countryside saying, "To my surprise and regret, I find not a pound of subsistence for man or horse. I must therefore appeal to your generosity and charity to supply as far as each one is able the wants of the brave soldiers who have battled for your liberty for 4 years. We require meat, beef, cattle, sheep, hogs, flour, meal, corn, and provender at any quantity that can be spared. The quartermaster of the army will visit you and make arrangements to pay for what he receives or give the proper vouchers or certificates. I feel assured that all will give to the extent of their means." Aside from provisions, Lee also worried about the column coming from Richmond under Richard Ewell. Ewell found that he couldn't cross at the designated bridge along his route, but had to cross at the Richmond and Danville Railroad bridge. Soldiers positioned planks on the railroad ties across the bridge so that they and the artillery could cross. Ewell camped on the south or west bank of the river just a mile from the bridge on the night of the 4th, while the rest of the army stayed at Amelia Courthouse that same night. As Lee waited at that location, the Union armies moved sluggishly on April 4th, with Ord's men only making it to Wilson's Station and the 2nd and 6th Corps moving only a short distance. The major movement came when Sheridan's cavalry and the 5th Corps moved to Jennings' Ordinary, halfway between Jetersville and Burkeville Station. Then, moving to Jetersville, where the infantry fortified either side of the railroad to prevent any provisions from getting to Lee's army. Earlier, Grant intercepted a message from Lee to Danville requesting supplies from that location. Grant intended to stop that from happening. Darkness covering the Virginia countryside saw the armies in those same positions until morning.